This is Play-by-Playcast,
Is that faster than a Greyhound?
the podcast about play-by-play guys, for play-by-play guys, by, I'm told, a play-by-play guy.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Now here's the host of Play-by-Playcast, Tom Bodett. Wait, the Motel 6 guy?
We'll leave the light on for you.
No, Joel Godet.
Joe Godet.
Joel.
Joel?
Joel, with an L.
Okay, here's your host, Joel Godet.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
This is episode 89 of Play-by-Playcast. Thanks as always for the stream, the download, the listen to a podcast for play-by-play broadcasters about play-by-play broadcasters, hosted by a play-by-play broadcaster. It's a professional development podcast diving into the tips, tricks, experience, stories, process, and preparations of some of the biggest and best play-by-play announcers in the business. And you can find us on social media. The podcast is at PXPcast. And my handle is at Joel Godet, Joelgod. My email is jgodett at bsu.edu. jgodet at bsu for Ball State University.edu. Our guest today is Eric Hasseltine. He is the voice on radio of the Memphis Grizzlies, and he's been such since 2005. And we'll talk a little bit about his early rise in sports broadcasting. Eric is from California, went to college in California, started his career in California, and did a bunch of different, we'll talk about some odd jobs that broadcasters have at different points in their lives, in addition to being a broadcaster and a radio voice. But really, since he moved from California, he's been really stable since 2005. So what is that now, 13 years? Eric's been with the Memphis Grizzlies. Actually, even before that, he went to the Memphis Grizzlies before he became the voice as a pregame, postgame talk show guy, and then took over in 2005 under, honestly, some really tragic circumstances. Don Poier was his predecessor with the Grizzlies, and Don actually passed away mid-season on the road when he was the voice of the Grizzlies, and Eric, being the next man up, you hate to say right place, right time, but being in the right place at the right time, being the next man up, filled in for Don. And then with the blessing of Don's wife basically saying he would want it to be you, decided that he was going to stick around and apply for the job after the season and when it became open again. Heading into the next season, he applied for the job and did wind up getting it. And we'll get into that story and that process a little bit. But really, ever since then, Eric Hasseltine has been the voice of the Memphis Grizzlies. So after climbing his way up through his early days in California, he then made the trip to Memphis, and since then has been associated with the Grizzlies. Lot to talk with Eric Hasseltine about, so we will dive right into it. The voice of the Memphis Grizzlies. Grew up in California listening to Bill King. That was his idol as a Bay Area guy. So where else do we start our conversation but where Eric started in sports broadcasting? His influence, or his influencer, Bill King.
Well, as a kid, this was before we had 200 channels of cable and satellite TV, and there was like 40 games a year baseball-wise televised, so radio really was the medium where you got a lot of sports. Basketball was rarely televised. In fact, back then the finals were even tape delayed, so radio was where you heard it. And I just remember having a little radio in my room and listening to Bill King and Lon Simmons on A's games, and Bill King also did the Raiders and did the Warriors. At one point he held all three major jobs, and I thought it was great to listen to and see the picture. And growing up, you always want to be a player. You want to be, dream of hitting a home run in the World Series or making a big shot. And you just, as a kid, you don't realize how hard it is to get to that level. So when I realized that I was not going to be that good, I just decided in high school to kind of focus on where I could be around the game. And that was one way to do it. I was fortunate that at my high school we had a television studio there, so I took broadcasting classes in high school and my senior year, as much as I would have loved to have been on the basketball team, I was at a school where we had 3 guys on that team go on to play some level of professional basketball, 2 in the NBA, and another, was the last cut in an NBA summer camp. So we were pretty good, and so I decided that I would try to do my hand at play-by-play with the television studio there, and we got to do one game before St. Mary's College, who's got a pretty good basketball team of their own right, called for their TV cameras back. So they loaned them to us, and then 2 of theirs broke, and they said, well, we need those back. So we couldn't televise any more games. But it was fun, and I fell in love with it and realized that it was something I was interested in, but didn't quite chase it down my first couple of years of college. When I transferred from UC Riverside to UC Davis, I happened to be working with a guy who was doing a sports talk radio show, and I said, I'd love to come on and try my hand at that. And luckily enough, he called me during the springtime and said, hey, I need a guy that can talk about baseball. Come on in. And I loved baseball and still do, and went in and knocked it out of the park, I guess, because they kept me around. And about a year later, I was the sports director and had to hire a play-by-play guy. So I looked in the mirror and I said, you're hired. And the rest, as they say, is history.
You mentioned painting the picture, and that's kind of what you loved early. And I thought what was interesting when you were talking about Bill King in the interview I saw also was that he really painted a picture.
Yeah.
What's that mean to you when you talk about painting a picture beyond just the who has the ball and where it is? But what do you like to do that you think helps paint a picture and kind of, I don't want to say makes you stand out, but makes what you do something that people can latch onto?
Well, and that's the best compliment somebody can pay a play-by-play guy on the radio, I think, because TV is just a different world. The picture's there. You don't have to paint the picture, and you have to be less verbose, and you have to really pick and choose your spots. And it's a whole different skill set. So those guys are really, really good at what they do, and I just think when you're on radio, you have to remember a couple of things. You have to remember that you are the audience's eyes and ears. You are the one telling them what's happening. So for me, and again, going back to the Bill King thing, what I thought he did better than anybody I had ever heard was describe what was happening during the play. And yeah, I'd say that anybody can give space and location of the ball, but tell your audience instead of being on the left wing that he's on the beyond the 3-point line, or if someone's coming to set a screen, let them know that the screen's coming. Things like that, just little things. And, you have to remember in the midst of that, too, to give time and score. And I got a Twitter message from a guy the other day because I was harping on the NBA's All-Star coverage that I had literally zero idea who was on the halftime show. And so, and he said, well, time and score, you got to be better about that. And I try to be as militant about that as I possibly can. And, it's just painting the whole thing, where the ball is, who's got the ball, what the play is developing to do. And so, the biggest mistake I think sometimes we make on radio broadcasts is we try to say too much. You don't have to describe every single second as long as you give, the location. People know the ball's moving, and you just can't talk sometimes fast enough with the ball moving. So I think, you pick and choose your spots where you maybe give a little bit more description, a little less exactness, if you get what I mean. Like, you don't have to say, the 47 passes and all these things, but more so who has the ball, what's the score, how the play is developing, that kind of thing, I think gives the audience an idea of what's happening.
That was one thing I was going to ask, was with the NBA and how quickly it moves sometimes. How do you keep pace with it and picking and choosing the right things to say of what you see?
Well, it helps to, I've been a fan of the game since I was a kid. I grew up loving Dr. J. It was either Dr. J or Magic or Larry Bird that people generally, were fans of. And so listening to, again, Bill King do the Warriors games, and then, watching Dick Stockton and Tommy Heinsohn call, CBS games, I just understand what's happening in the game, having loved to play it. I've been fortunate to be around some really good coaches over my years, been involved in enough practices where I can kind of see what they're trying to do. And I was lucky. When I got into calling play-by-play, I had two amazing coaches at UC Davis that treated me like I was part of the team. Our football coach was a guy named Bob Biggs, and our basketball coach was a guy named Bob Williams, who, the two Bobs, as I called them, basically from the day I contacted both of them, treated me like I was part of the team. And that really, really helped, because you can get a coach who, they don't want to do the interview. They don't really think you belong. You're just kind of more of a nuisance. These guys looked at me as an opportunity to get support for their programs. And they also knew that this is something I love doing, and I took it seriously. It wasn't just, hey, I'm just going to give this a shot, and I won't really care too much if it sounds good or not. I wanted them to sound great. I wanted them to be iconic, so to speak, amongst our listeners. And I didn't even understand everything at first. I was at Davis. It was really a unique situation where it's 12 miles west of Sacramento. And so there was the station that carried the Sacramento Kings actually put UC Davis football on commercial. And so I was doing it at first on the student station, while the guy that was doing it on the commercial station, we were both doing the games. And he had aspirations of going on as well to a professional career. Unfortunately for him, he chose to do something else. He found a good business to get into, and has really done well with that. But he was very talented, and the thing that helped him along was he was incredibly well prepared. And so when I first got in the business, I didn't have a real mentor or anybody to show me what I needed to do. So after a couple of games, I saw his game charts and notes, and I said, hey, would you mind if I, had a blank copy of those forms you have? And, I'll never forget this moment. It's where I knew this is what I wanted to do. The commercial station was in the comfy press box. The student station was in the rickety old one that had been used for years before they redid the other one. And our assistant athletic director came up to me in the second quarter, and he goes, hey, I need to talk to you at halftime. And I said, okay. And I didn't know what was going on. That's one of those moments where when you're a kid, you're going, I didn't do it. And so at halftime, we had a guy back in the studio, thankfully, or my color commentator and sideline reporter would host halftime and just give me a chance to take a break. So he pulled me aside. He goes, hey, listen, I don't know what you're doing tonight. And I just was like, oh, gosh, here it comes. Like, what did I say? And he goes, but literally, like, all the people all of our diehard fans are turning and listening to you. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, they're saying, like, you may be the best college broadcaster they've ever heard. And I went, okay, well, that's very nice of him. It didn't hurt that we were, demolishing the team we were playing. So we sounded pretty good no matter what. But it really, he's like, I don't know what switch you flipped, but you turned a corner. And he listened the next week when we were on the road, and he's like, you need to chase this down. You need to go after this. And so that confidence from him gave me the confidence to think, hey, maybe I can do this. And it's not an easy business. As you know, it's one that's very, very subjective. I was told no many, many times before I was told yes. And it stings, man. It stings when you've got a dream and a job opens up that you think you're perfect for, and that you think there's no way anybody could do this better than I could, or at least, on the same level. I should be there with a couple other guys. I just need an opportunity to show people I can do it, and it's just not coming. And, I tell young guys that I have an opportunity to talk to on a regular basis, hey, don't get down on yourself because someone tells you no. I wasn't afraid to put my tape and resume out there to any level. I mean, I had no business applying for a job in Dallas as a midday talk show host right out of college, but I did anyway. And the guy's like, look, man, he goes, I think you got a lot of talent, but you need some polishing, and I can't put you on the air in the fifth biggest market in the country. But I admire that you send this to me and get on me to, like, give you an answer. And he goes, but, keep in touch. And, I was told by a guy that was hiring for the Seahawks at the time, and they were looking at, I really thought my career was going to go to the NFL. And they had narrowed their search down to 3 guys. I somehow knew somebody that knew him, gave him a call, and he goes, hey, I'm down to 3. Send it to me. I'll see if I can put you in the mix, but we're pretty set on these 3 guys. So this and that. And he got it, and he said, listen, I was blown away. I think it's A-level work. He goes, but I needed an A+. I've got 3 guys that have more experience, but don't stop doing this. Like, give yourself 2 more years. And he goes, and I have no doubt that you'll be somewhere in the professional ranks. And those things helped, because there were plenty of doors slammed in my face, guys that said, no, not good enough. You know, I will never forget not even hearing back from San Jose State University, which there were a couple factors involved. And I knew a guy in that office, and he said, listen, they liked you, but they were just going to go someone more local that people in San Jose knew. And I said, yeah, that makes sense. And now it's such a different game, because it's really very much, I don't know how to say it. It basically stays in the family, so to speak. It's very, you know, there's a lot of nepotism. And so, you know, if you have someone doing their pre-half and post work, you know, if the job opens up, more than likely they're going to get an opportunity at it. That happened with the Chicago Bears years ago, and Jeff Joniak, who's their radio voice, has been doing it ever since. And I went after that job, and Jeff, although I had more experience in terms of game calls at the time, Jeff had a relationship with the broadcast team, and that matters. That does matter. You know, if I were to ever step down, I would fully expect that either our TV sideline guy or our halftime, you know, our pre-half and post guy would have the inside track, because they know everybody that we work with. But you never know. So it's always one of these things where, you know, you never know when your opportunity is going to come. And that happened to me a little bit too. You got to put yourself in a place where you can be in the right place at the right time. And you got to have some luck. Some of it seems like it's a rough time, but maybe it's a blessing in disguise. And, you know, my story is one that I was just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And unfortunately, a very good friend of mine passed away in the middle of one of our seasons, and the job opened up. And thankfully, they gave me an opportunity and never took it back. I couldn't have taken the job, though, had his wife not said, hey, look, you know, you're the guy he would have wanted to take over for him, so make him proud. And that was, you know, that's a hard way to get your dream job.
Yeah.
You know, when a friend passes away, you know, all of a sudden you're thrust into the opportunity of a lifetime, but, you know, you never wanted it that way. So, but again, it just goes back to put yourself in a position where good things can happen, and you never know.
I do want to come back and ask you about Don a little bit, but if I can backtrack just a little bit even further, you talked about getting told no multiple times, and you know, nevertheless you persist. How did getting told no at any number of points in your career maybe make you better? What types of things did you take, or what did people tell you when they said no because that you were able to apply and try to improve for the next time until you got a yes?
Well, you know, it's funny, because some guys will give you the exact reasons why they think you should not get the job. They'll say, hey, look, you're too fast on this, or you're not clear enough on this, or whatever it may be. You know, other guys will just say, no, don't bother me, I'm not interested, blah, blah, blah. You know, and that's fine. That's everybody's prerogative. Anytime, you know, I have a lot of young guys will send, hey, do you mind listening to a tape? And I say, absolutely not, because somebody did that for me and said, listen, here's what I would do. And, you know, if I was hiring, this is what I'm looking for. And I've always tried to call the games in terms of, you know, what I do on the radio, of what I would want to hear. And now maybe that's a little selfish, but I feel like as a sports fan, I kind of have a pulse, you know, an idea of what will make the game sound interesting to other sports fans. So, you know, I was just told, like, hey, you know, make sure you know, don't go too fast. You know, don't try to squeeze everything in. Slow it down a little bit. Don't be afraid to just take a breath and use your color guy. I thought football, in all honesty, was probably the easiest to call, simply because after every play, you've got a break. You know, now offenses move a lot faster than they used to. You know, everybody used to huddle up, get set. Now it's a little bit different. But I was really on the same page with my color guy for football, so we would have a lot of fun together. And then basketball, you know, at the time there at Davis, it was a one-man show, so I did it by myself. Thankfully, my bosses in Memphis believe that there should be 2 on the broadcast, so I have a color commentator, and it can help. But it's also, there's times where they can't squeeze a word in edgewise. and you're playing Golden State or Houston, they're moving at 100 miles an hour. You take a shot and you want the guy to analyze it, but before you know it, here comes Chris Paul or James Harden or Steph Curry or LeBron James back the other way, and you got to call that. So what I was basically told, and when I got told no, is like, hey, you got to get a feel for the flow of the game, and that comes with experience. As I've told a lot of people that have asked me over the years, how do I get into this? I said, we got to go to a school that at least has a radio station. You don't have to take broadcasting classes per se, but you've got to get on the air one way or the other, and you've got to get game experience that is more valuable than any class or lecture you can go to. Calling the game is the big deal. And so that's and the great thing about today's technology is you can do games for any school. If they have a website, and just about every high school I've heard of in America does, you can do a game for them. You can do, you can call a game into their website. You can call it onto, a podcast, whatever it may be. And that's the great thing about technology. That wasn't around when I was coming up. I went to a sportscasters camp in LA from a guy named Roy Engelbrecht. And the famous thing Roy would always say is, you may end up in Silver City, New Mexico. And I was like, well, I hope not, because I don't know where Silver City, New Mexico is. And I imagine it's a fine place to live, but I would much rather end up in, I don't know, Denver, Orlando, any team, any city with multiple sports teams or an NBA team, whatever it may be. So, again, it's all in the eye of the beholder. And I was very, very fortunate to be told yes here, after I finished out the season when Don passed. But even then, I was told, hey, we're going to see what's out there, just because, as much as we like you, we owe it to ourselves to see if there's anybody else out there that might be there. And that was a tough time. That was a hard summer to know that they were looking at potentially some other guys. And, you never know. Eddie Doucette, who was a longtime voice of the Bucks, had a relationship with Hubie Brown. And even though he had retired, Eddie wanted to get back in the game. He missed it. And Hubie went in and pitched for Eddie to get the job. And my boss thankfully said, hey, look, I think Eddie's terrific, but what does Eddie have in him? 1-2 years, and then we're going to be right back in the same system. I think I'm going to stay with the kid that's with us. And thankfully, Hubie liked me. So Hubie was like, oh, okay, great, he's good. And so, that meant a lot too. So, it's one of those things where, when you get told no, and I was told no the first year of the opening here in Memphis. They switched radio stations, created a position for me to come with them, and I knew that our television guy, who's now in Toronto, his name's Matt Devlin, was leaving, and they were going to switch Don Poier, who had been with the team since day one, from radio to TV. So I knew the radio job was open. When they said, hey, look, we want you to come with us. And I said, well, what about the play-by-play job? And they said, we just don't think you're quite ready. And I had, out of my own pocket, had an engineer set up a broadcast spot during Grizzlies games, just did them into a mini disc just to keep polished and fresh and get better. And my boss said flat out, he says, you'll be there very soon, but you're 32 years old, and we think that you still have some things to learn about this business, both on air and off. And I said, okay, that's, not what I wanted to hear, but I'm fine with it. And a lot of guys at that point might go, screw this, I'm out of here. I'm not going to stick around if you're not going to give me a promotion. Well, I also didn't know we were hiring Pete Pranica, who had been on the television call for the Portland Trailblazers for multiple years and had more experience than I did. And Pete was he apparently was very close to getting a job in San Antonio, and they decided to go with Dick Stockton at the last minute, and it kind of left him holding the bag, and there he was. So our guys grabbed him, and he's now been our TV voice since the 04-05 season. It was started radio, and then when Don passed away, he switched over, and I slid in, and we're both proud of the fact that we've worked alongside one another as one of the longer running tandems in the league, because guys switch, guys retire, guys go do new things. We've been both, manning the broadcast, and neither one of us ever missed a game in, 13 seasons now. So it's a neat relationship. And, again, like you asked, and it's a long answer to your very good question, which was, how did you get better? I I think it just comes naturally too. I just kept doing what I knew to work, and when something didn't work, you move on from it. It's a bizarre deal. Like when I've got, everybody has their catchphrase, and I had friends of mine saying, you need a catchphrase, you need a hook. And I just said, I don't want it to be anything corny or silly or whatever. And, you've got guys, I think it's the hockey voice of the Lightning uses movie quotes for a goal, which is great.
Yeah.
And they're hilarious, and it's really well done. And that's his thing. That's his shtick, and that works for him. For me, I don't know where we came up with it, but just one day I said, well, what if we said ring it up and put 3 on the board when we hit a 3? And let's see how it sounds. And we did it, and someone goes, well, that sounds actually, it's pretty, it's pretty solid. It gets to the point. It lets the listener know what just happened. So yeah, stick with that. And now, you walk around town and I see someone with a T-shirt on it because a local clothing company said, hey, would you mind if we made T-shirts with that slogan? And I said, would I mind? I think it would be the coolest thing ever. And, I don't have a trademark on it or anything. I said, go ahead.
How many did you buy?
None. None. I actually ran into someone who worked there, and I said, well, I got to get one of those. She goes, yeah, we don't have any more. We sold them all. And I was like, well, that's good, I guess. So, it's a neat thing. And it's flattering because it lets me know, people care. And that's the great thing about Memphis is that people do care about this team, and it's a very family-like atmosphere with everybody, kind of feeling like we've got a chip on our shoulder, that everybody's out to get us, which really isn't 100% accurate, but it's a good way to band together as a small market team.
How much Don Poier is in you? Just as I mean, you can take that any way you want.
Yeah, no, a lot. A lot. He was the ultimate professional. He really was. He had his notebook. He had his number 2 pencil. He had his reads. He would get there for a 7:00 game. He'd be at the arena by 4:00, sitting at his spot. He understood what he got to do, was a blessing. And he treated every day like it was a gift, and, loved his wife, happened to be his second wife, but these two were, they were made for each other. And we'd always give Don a hard time because you get on the bus, and I didn't travel every game with the team at that time. We've kind of since switched that, which it would have been fun to travel with him because the trips I did take, he would always say, boy, I wish you would travel more. It's always fun to have you around. But it was hilarious. We'd get on the bus, and his wife's name was Barb. Barb, we're on the bus. Barb, we're at the plane. And I'm like, man, how many times are you going to call her in the next 30 minutes? But that's how they were. And he and I and Barb and his wife and our trainer at the time, who's now also up in Toronto, Scotty McCullough, we would spend the summers about 2-3 days a week playing golf together. And just the things he would teach me, away from the game. And every year, this is a guy that knows I want what he has. I want to do what he's doing. I don't want to take it away from him, but that's where I want to get to. And a lot of guys will take that as a threat. He took it as an opportunity to mentor. And when he did, it changed me because he would listen to my tapes and he would tell me at the end of every year, he's like, hey, look, we're not going to have you much longer. Like, you're too good. And when something opens up, you're going to get it. And your dreams you're going to get there. He goes, but, never forget that once you do, there's still work to be done. And that's the thing. He knew there's no perfect call. There's no game out there where you just go, okay, I got it. I can't improve anymore. Tonight was it. And I've mastered this craft. That's the thing about broadcasting is you never truly master it because every game is different and every game presents new stories. So he really taught me that. He had quirky sayings, but they were all his. And, the saying that's lived forever here is it was a preseason game of all things. And the team really did an interesting deal when they first moved here. They scheduled their first 4 preseason games at home, and they played them to win. I mean, these other teams are throwing out guys that are probably, in the history books more so as doing something else with their career rather than playing basketball. But we're playing our starting 5 like 30 minutes. Now, when we got on the road, we played all the young guys, and let them, try to work it out. And Jason Williams hit a fadeaway 3-point shot in the corner after being down by like 12 to tie the game on this big run. And he said, only in the movies and in Memphis. And it just stuck. And it was so eye-opening when I first got there and heard him for the first time. And I had listened to Gary Gerald in Sacramento, who's a true pro and still on the call. And I knew how good Gary was, and I really heard how good Don was. And I went, wow, I've got a lot of work to do. And so being able to listen to him night in, night out, and being able to talk to him about different things, not just basketball, but about how to handle the travel, how to handle having a family. And, he knew that year that he passed away, that now my ex-wife and I were going through some really tough stuff, and we didn't make it through it. But he knew that I had a child, and he tried to explain to me, hey, look, no matter what happens with that, make sure your daughter always knows that, you're doing this for them because you love it, but because it's a career that can provide for them. He had to be away from his girls. He had to be, in Memphis when they were in Washington. So it's one of those things where, you never can put a price tag or enough of a thank you on someone that gives you everything they've got to make you better.
There was an article in Memphis Magazine where you said he taught you how to follow the team you're covering. What do you mean by that?
Well, what he always believed was we were all in it together. We were a group and a family. And so he wanted to know, like, what guys liked off the court, like what their interests were, what their journey to the NBA was. And so you follow them. You don't just want to get out there and go, hey, great, I'm the voice of the Grizzlies, and your fans to relate to them. The tighter the bond becomes. People raised an eyebrow when we signed Mike Conley to that $30+ million deal a year. Everybody went, wow, for a guy that's never made an all-star team. And what I explained to people was, hey, look, I get it. I get looking at the numbers going, no way this guy's worth $30 million a year. To us, he was. And proof of that is this year for us. We're 18 and 38 at the All-Star break, and all because Mike Conley on November 11th had to shut it down and hasn't played since. And that changed our whole complexion. So, for people to not understand, what he meant to us, we have been so lucky to have Mike because Mike's very open. So when we talk to Mike, we talk about things other than basketball. We talk about his charity work. We talk about how he's grown from, a 19, 20-year-old rookie to a father of now, 1 and 1 on the way, and went from a kid to a grown man, and how the work ethic was put in. And his dad was an Olympian, and how that influenced him. And then you've got Mark Gasol's story, who was, when we first got here, this chubby 7-foot kid that came around because his brother was in the NBA, and we all went, wow. One brother's tall and lean. One brother is, squatty. So, those things matter. To connect their team, you're not just calling the games. You're not just watching 48 minutes of basketball. You're trying to get them to connect to those people as well. And some guys it's easier, and some guys it's not. Some guys are immensely private. Some guys are don't like talking to the media. Other guys just don't have much to say. We've got players that I've tried to engage them. I've tried to talk to them, but it's just not their thing. And you respect that too. You can be friendly with them, but you find out another way. So, whenever it's tougher in college because guys are in and out. Like if you're the radio voice for Duke, you're going to have Marvin Bagley for a year. You get to know him as best you can, but you're probably not going to really connect with Marvin Bagley. Now, if you're the radio voice at, say, Wichita State or Cincinnati or places where there's not a lot of one-and-done kids, you can get to know guys over 4 years. In the NBA, that's kind of the same thing. You have your rookies and first-round draft picks probably for 2 to 3 years, but it is still a business. So you can have a great relationship with a guy. I got along great with James Ennis, and lo and behold, one day we traded him, and James Ennis was gone. And then you run into him again down the road when you play the team they're on now, and you say hi, but it's not the same as seeing him in your team hotel or walking by him on to him after a game, running into him at a restaurant. So it's connecting on a greater level.
How much do you still listen back to yourself now? I know you talked about Pete saying there is no perfect call ever. How often do you get a chance to kind of listen back? And even now at this point in your career, what do you listen back for?
I don't as much as I used to. I don't know why. I probably need to go back to doing that. I try to hear where it didn't flow. I'm listening. If I listen back to my work, it's different now because everything's so digital. I have to have it put into a computer sent to me, and I probably should listen to. I think you should listen to about a quarter after each game. Lee Hamilton used to do that all the time. Unfortunately, he said some things that got him removed from doing play-by-play in Minnesota after doing a long stint with the Chargers, but very, very talented play-by-play guy. He would go back and listen to the whole game and take notes. Unfortunately, you don't always have time to do that. I need to be better about that part, but if I'm listening back to my work when I do, I try to listen with my boss, and we try to say, okay, hey, maybe not say that. What I was listening for were points where maybe I let my love of the team come too much through. You know what I mean? Not being fair, like killing a referee because he called a call against your team. When in reality, maybe it's the right call. Or going after a guy on the other team for something, and you kind of get hyped and you kind of get angry and whatever it may be. So, it becomes a thing where you have to put yourself under the microscope where you have to be very honest with yourself. So.
You listen back with your boss?
Yeah. Scott Zachary is my boss, the new director of broadcasting. My longtime boss, Randy Stevens, went on to be the executive producer at Fox Sports Southeast, which was a great opportunity for him. And so Scott and I will sit down every now and then, and we'll listen, and I value his opinion. Scott's been around the broadcasting business, 10 years longer than I have. And so he's going on year 30, I'm going on year 20. And so we talk a lot, and I'm like, hey, tell me where, if you were listening to this and I was sending you this tape, where it's good and where it needs work. And I said, and don't pull punches. Like, if something sucks, tell me it sucks. I think that's the biggest misnomer that people have, is, that you can't be honest with someone. You're going to hurt somebody's feelings. Man, hurt my feelings. Tell me it's not good. I welcome that from my listeners. I try to be very interactive with people that take the time to either listen to my talk show or the game. When they send a Twitter message, I'm like, don't pull punches. Like, do it constructively. Don't curse it. Call me names and say I'm a horrible human being. But, it's one of those things where I want to hear what's not working. I want someone to tell me what's not working. And that's the thing. So, it's something you have to do with yourself that, if you don't be honest with yourself, you can't get better.
Actually, I kind of like that you've got that ability to sit down with a boss like that and get that kind of feedback on a regular basis if you want it, which is something that.
It's great.
Yeah. I'll let you go on this. I'll let you go on this note in a pseudo non-broadcasting related question. But I know I saw that kind of coming up through everything to make ends meet. You have bartended, valet parked, you dealt blackjack, and you were a jet ski instructor. Is that right?
Yeah, I spent a summer in Lake Tahoe. I got hired. It was really just due to the fact that our school at UC Davis, because we were quarter system, didn't go back to fall classes until the end of September. So a lot of the Lake Tahoe-based casinos like hiring students for the summer because they really don't get busy until right after the middle of June. Now, you're not there for Memorial Day, but they start their summer dealing school. We get out of school, say, June 14th. That's a Friday. Dealing school starts June 17th. And so I got out of school. I packed up my car. I headed up to Lake Tahoe where I had some friends that had stayed for a year. And basically they, put you through 2 weeks of dealing school. But what I realized was, hey, it's not quite as lucrative as I thought it was going to be. It was a slow summer, 96. The Olympics were going on. That was when a lot of the casinos locally were being built. They had the casinos for Indian reservations. And so people weren't going up to Tahoe as much. And so I just happened to know somebody that knew the guy that owned the jet ski shop. And I said, well, I've always liked to ride and I've always enjoyed it. And he said, well, I need a guy during the day. I need another, they called them water dogs, which was the term for the instructor. And, when you're talking about instructing, it's not like we gave private lessons unless people wanted us to. And that was fun too. But, I could go out and do a few tricks here or there and know how to maneuver a ski through a good little slalom thing. But, it's more wave runner based. And so my instruction really basically usually consisted of, here's your throttle. Don't forget when you let go of the throttle, you can't steer the ski. So if you're gonna hit something, try to steer it, like keep your thumb on the throttle but very lightly, and then you'll move. But just do yourself a favor and try not to hit anything. And don't think, always think that everything that you see in the distance is 20 feet closer than it actually is. And so we had a lot of fun with it, and I'll tell you what, there's nothing more cold than jumping into Lake Tahoe at 7:30 in the morning, diving down to unlock the ski, which is chained to the bottom of the lake, about 3 feet, 4 feet deep, and then having to get on the ski and take it for a lap to get the gas running through the motor, and you are soaking wet, and it's about 45, 50 degrees, and that water's cold. And so that was always an eye-opener, but I loved it. I would get off work from my night shift at the casinos around, 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. I'd go home, I'd take a nap, I'd go over to the resort and start work at, usually until when the other group of guys left for college, a couple of them went to the semester-based schools in the area. I was going in at noon, but when they left, I had to go in at 8 a.m. So I'd go work from 8 to 4 and then go home and take another nap and then get back to the casino at 9. And it was as much fun as I've ever had doing anything outside of doing what I do now. And boy, there was part of me that wanted to just be a water dog the rest of my life. But these things called bills and families cost money, so it wasn't exactly the most lucrative job, but boy, it sure was fun.
See, I love the perspective of that. I've never had one of those jobs that is just out there, so to speak, on the way up. So I relish those stories.
I did everything I could. I did everything I could. I valet parked a few times when I was in college. I learned how to bartend. I was a substitute teacher and enjoyed that immensely, except for, when you see kids making mistakes and you're not their parent, it was really hard because and they were so much smarter than they knew, and they were making so many silly mistakes that you could see they were heading right for it. But you just had to say, okay, hey, look, you're 17, 18 years old. I was doing a lot of high school. Like, you're old enough to make your own decisions. You're old enough to make your own mistake. You're old enough to make your own way. And so that was tough. But I always wanted the flexibility of being able to get a phone call and say, hey, can you go to a game in Chicago tomorrow? Yep, I'm on it. I couldn't do a 9 to 5 and do that. And so bartending, substitute teaching, mortgage industry, those things were things where I could say, hey, I'm going to be gone tomorrow, but I can work on my stuff from away. So yeah, it's a hard business. Radio and television is very, very difficult when you're first starting out to make ends meet. You got to find some other sources of income, and you got to be willing to do things, maybe somebody isn't willing to do. Take a job that other guys aren't willing to take, but if it helps pay the bills, great. If you're willing to call a game for a pizza one night, awesome, but it's going to get you more experience. And believe me, I've done that. I called games on cable access back in the day when, cities would broadcast their rec league championship, but they say, hey, we can't really pay you, but if we buy you dinner, would you do it? Yeah, absolutely, I'll come. Basketball you'll ever see, but it certainly was a lot of fun.
If people want to find you on social media or say hey that way, how do they track you down on Twitter and the like?
It's very, very creative. It's just at Eric Hasseltine. I went out on a limb with that one and tried to find a really innovative name. I just thought it was easy. And I'm a big believer in this, too, when you're doing radio. Use your name. Your name is powerful. Your name is going to resonate with people. You can have a show called The Sports Bar, but if someone tunes in and you say, hey, you're listening to The Sports Bar, and they're just driving through, they don't know your name. If they say, hey, you're listening to the Eric Hasseltine show, they know that you're probably Eric Hasseltine. And I think that's one of the lessons I've learned over the years that I am a big believer in. Make sure your name is heard. Make sure your name resonates with people that are taking time to listen to your work. And so same thing with Twitter, same thing with any social media, on Facebook, Instagram. It's a different world now. I'm 45 years old. If I didn't work in this business, I probably wouldn't have an Instagram account or a Twitter account. I certainly would have Facebook to connect with old friends, but I certainly wouldn't have 5,000 friends on there because I don't know 5,000 people. But when people know your name and they feel like they know you from being on the radio, and I try to make all of my stuff very personal. I let people know, hey, I have 2 kids. I'm a proud father. I'm not always around the way I would like to be with them. I have to balance a career and being a dad and, being in a position where people, don't get the opportunities that I've gotten, but there are drawbacks to it too. There's going to be times where my son and even my daughter is a softball player and a soccer player, and she's about to start high school. And unfortunately, she lives in California, so I don't get to see many of her games. My son lives here. I'm not going to get to see some of his basketball games when he plays because we could be on a road trip. And that's a tough pill to swallow sometimes. But, you stay connected through things like social media, and I always welcome it. Like any questions, anything people ever want to say or have a question about anything, about our team, about the business, yeah, man, hit me up. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. I love interacting with fans who basically let you know whether they are appreciative of your work or not. And whenever someone's not, I say, all right, tell me how we can do it better. Tell me what you think can be better about the show or about the broadcast, and we'll work on it. And you got to be able to do that.
Eric Hasseltine, our guest of the Memphis Grizzlies, here on episode 89 of Play-by-Playcast. I kind of said it with astonishment when I asked the question, and I didn't necessarily mean it that way, but when I said, you listen back with your boss, it's actually kind of cool, and something that, we talk about feedback systems a lot on this podcast, and I don't know how many, but like 50 of the 89 episodes that we've had, we've talked about where you get your feedback from, and, I think it's interesting that you've got somebody kind of built in there that you can get that from on a fairly regular basis. And, we had Steve Martin on a couple of weeks ago. He is their director of broadcasting, and I don't know the full structure of the Hornets, but if there is somebody above him that is like that, it's kind of nice for Eric Hasseltine. And I don't know the exact structure of every NBA team, who is set up in what way, but it's kind of nice for Eric that he's got that guy above him as a director of broadcasting with an NBA franchise that he can sit down and have those conversations with, more so than, reaching out to external mentors that mean a lot to all of us, but to have that almost mentor built in and around you on a daily basis, I thought was really cool. And it just perked my ears up when he said, hey, like I walk into my boss's office and we sit down and we listen to games together or go over games and what we thought about how things were, how things sounded, and how they can get better from there. So I thought that was neat. Eric Hasseltine on Twitter, he mentioned it there, his handle, for those that are spellingly challenged, EricHasseltine, at Eric Hasseltine. You can find him on Twitter as well, and you can find his talk show on 92.9 ESPN in Memphis. We didn't really talk about that a lot, but Eric Hasseltine does do a talk show also. So something else that I guess we'll save for another day and time with Eric Hasseltine he leads into the Gary Parrish show, who is actually, I believe, from Memphis as well. That might be a local show. Gary Parrish is a national name, but without knowing a whole lot about the Memphis radio scene, that is, that's a local show. It looks like that's a local show. It looks like I did not know that. I've learned something about the Memphis sports radio scene today. Many thanks, though, to Eric Hasseltine for taking the time out and chatting with us here during the All-Star break, by the way, as well. So he had time out from basketball and decided to spend it talking about basketball and broadcasting here on Play-by-Playcast. Next week is John Rook. Really good conversation with the public address voice of the New England Patriots and the radio voice of the Providence Friars and 90,000 other things. And we literally will start next week's episode by me just asking John Rook what he does, and he will give us the laundry list. But he is a guy that wears many hats and has worn many hats throughout his entire broadcasting career. Fun conversation with John Rook of New England, I guess we could say, of New England sports broadcasting, coming up next week for episode 90 here on PXPcast. Again, you can find us on Twitter at PXPcast. I'm at Joel Godet. And hey, if you've gotten this far on the podcast and you're still listening to my ramblings in the close, throw us a rating or review on iTunes. Just a couple of stars or a couple of comments, whatever comes to mind with how this program resonates with you. Would always very much appreciate it. But they are playing the Go Home music, which is our cue to get up on out of here. Until next week, we're 7 days off. This is Play-by-Playcast, and we're out.